They say that blood is thicker than water. For 72 years, I believed that. I believed it when I held my daughter for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I believed it when I walked her down the aisle, my heart swelling with a pride so fierce it hurt. And I believed it on that crisp autumn evening, sitting across from her at the fanciest restaurant in town, when she smiled that brilliant smile I loved so much and said, "Dad, I have a surprise for you." But blood can be poisoned. And water? Water can wear down stone. What she handed me next wasn't a surprise. It was a declaration of war. An envelope that held my ruin, a debt for $500,000, and the signature at the bottom was mine. This isn't just a story about money. It's about a betrayal so deep it carves out your soul, and the slow, patient, and terrible revenge that follows. My life, up until that October evening, had been a testament to quiet satisfaction. My name is Walter Peterson. For 45 years, I ran Peterson & Sons Construction. The sons part was always aspirational, a hope I held for a boy I never had. Instead, the universe gave me Calantha, my Callie. And from the moment I first saw her, red-faced and screaming, I knew she was more than enough. My wife, Helen, was the architect of our happiness. I was the builder. I built our house on Miller's Ridge with my own two hands from the foundation poured to the last cedar shingle on the roof. I remember Helen, pregnant with Callie, bringing me lemonade as I worked under the hot summer sun, her hand resting on her stomach. "She's going to love this place, Walt," she'd said. "It's a forever home." And it was. Every scuff on the oak floorboards, every pencil mark on the kitchen door frame, tracking Callie's height, was a chapter in our story. After Helen passed from cancer 12 years ago, the house became a sanctuary of her memory. The scent of her rose garden still clung to the air in June, and her favorite armchair still held the faint imprint of her form. The silence was heavy sometimes, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the echo of decades of laughter. I retired at 65 with a healthy portfolio, a solid pension, and the house free and clear. My needs were simple: my workshop in the back, where I carved intricate wooden birds, my weekly poker game with old friends, and my daughter. Callie had always been the light of my life, bright, ambitious, and with a smile that could disarm armies. She'd married Brent a few years after college. Brent, he was a different story. He was a man who wore suits that were a little too shiny and spoke of disrupting markets and leveraging assets. He was always chasing the next big thing, a whirlwind of buzzwords and vague business plans. I never saw any actual products, just a string of fancy dinners and talk of venture capital that was just about to come through. I didn't dislike him, not at first. I just didn't get him. My world was one of tangible things: wood, steel, concrete. His was a world of ideas, of projections and possibilities that seemed to float away like smoke. But he made Callie happy. She looked at him with stars in her eyes, and for me, that was enough. I trusted her judgment. That was my first mistake. I helped them with the down payment on their sprawling new-build house in the suburbs. I paid for their lavish wedding. When Callie mentioned they were starting a new consulting firm, Innovate Dynamics, I wrote them a check for $50,000 as seed money, a gift. "Just to get you started, sweetheart," I'd said. "Oh, Dad, you're the best," she'd squealed, hugging me tightly. Brent had clapped me on the shoulder, a wide, toothy grin on his face. "You won't regret this, Walter. We're going to make you proud." They lived a life that seemed far beyond their means, but whenever I gently inquired, they had a ready answer. A big contract landed, a successful investment, a bonus. They drove a new German SUV every 2 years, took vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines, and Callie's social media was a curated gallery of their perfect, prosperous life. I was proud. I saw it as a reflection of the opportunities I'd worked so hard to provide for her. I was a fool, a proud, blind fool. The call came on a Tuesday. "Dad, how's my favorite retiree?" Callie's voice was like sunshine through the phone. "Can't complain, sweetheart. Just finished a Carolina wren. The detail on the feathers almost made me go cross-eyed." She laughed. "You and your birds. Listen, Brent and I want to take you out on Friday. To celebrate. Celebrate what? I asked, wiping sawdust from my hands. Oh, you'll see, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It's a surprise. A really big one. We've finally done it, Dad. We've hit the big time. Wear your good suit. We're going to Le Cirque. Le Cirque. The kind of place with more forks than a hardware store and wine lists thicker than a phone book. It was an extravagance, but the excitement in her voice was infectious. My daughter was happy. She was successful. What more could a father ask for? I pictured her telling me they were pregnant, that I was finally going to be a grandfather. My heart swelled at the thought. A new chapter. A new name to carve into the family tree. On Friday, I put on the dark navy suit Helen had bought for me for our 40th anniversary. I polished my best shoes and felt a flicker of the old excitement I used to feel when I took her dancing. I was about to celebrate my daughter's greatest success. I had no idea I was walking, smiling, into my own execution. Le Cirque was just as opulent as I'd imagined. A symphony of clinking glasses, hushed conversations, and the soft melody of a piano in the corner. A maitre d' with a posture like a drill sergeant led me to a secluded booth where Callie and Brent were already seated, champagne flutes in hand. Dad, you look so handsome! Callie jumped up to kiss my cheek. She was radiant in a shimmering emerald dress, diamonds sparkling at her throat. Brent, in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, stood and gave me a firm, confident handshake. Walter, good to see you. Glad you could make it, he said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. The dinner was a blur of impeccable service and exquisite food. Foie gras, lobster bisque, a filet mignon that melted in my mouth. Throughout it all, Callie and Brent were the perfect hosts, laughing, telling stories about their recent trip to Monaco, and filling my wine glass a little too quickly. They were painting a picture of a life I couldn't even fathom, a world of yachts, galas, and effortless wealth. We owe so much of it to you, Dad, Callie said, placing her hand over mine on the white tablecloth. Her hand was warm, her expression sincere. Your support, your belief in us, it gave us the foundation to build all of this. I'm just happy to see you thriving, sweetheart, I said, my chest tight with emotion. This was it, the moment. They were going to tell me about the baby. Brent cleared his throat, leaning forward with an air of theatrical gravity. Walter, we didn't just bring you here for the steak. As Callie said, this is a celebration. We've just closed a massive deal, a multi-year international contract that's going to set us up for life. That's wonderful news, I beamed. Congratulations, both of you. That's incredible. It is, Callie agreed, her eyes glittering with an intensity I hadn't seen before. But to close it, we had to make a big move, a power move, and that's where the surprise comes in. She reached into her expensive-looking handbag and pulled out a crisp, white legal-sized envelope. She slid it across the table to me. It landed softly next to my dessert fork. My heart was pounding. Was it an ultrasound photo? A deed to a vacation home they'd bought for me? I have a surprise for you, she said again, her voice soft. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy, too heavy for a photograph. My hands, usually so steady from years of handling tools, trembled slightly. I looked at her, then at Brent. They were both watching me, their faces expectant, their smiles fixed in place. I tore open the seal and pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. The top page was a letter from a financial institution I'd never heard of, Scion Capital Holdings. The language was dense, full of legal jargon, but certain words jumped out at me. Personal guarantee, loan agreement, principal amount, and then I saw the number, $500,000. I blinked, my mind struggling to process the information. It felt like a typo. I scanned the document, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. It was a loan, a massive business loan taken out by Innovate Dynamics. And then I saw the final page, the signature line for the guarantor, the one who was personally liable if the company defaulted. And there in neat cursive was my name, Walter Peterson. The air rushed out of my lungs. The sounds of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. What is this? I whispered, my voice hoarse. This is a joke, right? Callie's smile wavered for the first time. Dad, don't be so dramatic. It's just a formality. A formality? I held up the paper, my hands shaking uncontrollably now. "This says I'm on the hook for $500,000. I never signed this." "Of course you did, Dad. Don't you remember?" Brent said smoothly, taking a sip of his wine. "A few months ago, when we came over to have you sign the paperwork for the updated family trust, it was in that stack." My mind flashed back. They'd come over on a Sunday afternoon with a thick folder. Callie had been fussing over me, making me tea, telling me it was just some legal updates to make sure the house went to her smoothly when the time came, to avoid probate court. She said it would save her a lot of heartache down the road. I was distracted, touched by her foresight. She'd flipped through the pages, pointing here and there. "Sign here, Dad. Initial here." I hadn't read a word. I had trusted her. I had trusted my own daughter. You tricked me," I stammered, the betrayal a physical blow, knocking the wind from me. "You buried a loan guarantee in a stack of trust documents?" "We didn't trick you, Dad," Callie said, her voice taking on a harder, defensive edge. "We presented you with an opportunity. The bank needed a guarantor with significant assets to secure the funding for this new venture. Your credit, your house, it was the key that unlocked everything for us." "For you," my voice rose, and a nearby couple glanced over. "Callie, this is my retirement. Everything Helen and I worked for is tied up in those assets." "And we're not going to touch them," Brent cut in, his smooth facade cracking to reveal the cold steel beneath. "This is a sure thing, Walter. The loan will be paid back with the profits from the first quarter. This paper you're holding, it'll be meaningless in 6 months. This is just how the game is played at this level." I looked at my daughter, searching her face for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the little girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knee. I found nothing, only a cool, appraising stare, the stare of a stranger. "So this is my surprise," I said, the words tasting like ash. "My surprise is that you've gambled my entire life's work without my knowledge or consent." "My surprise," she corrected me, her voice chillingly calm, "is that I've finally become the success you always wanted me to be. I just needed a little push start from the family bank." I slowly pushed my chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. I dropped the envelope on the table as if it were contaminated. The half-eaten dessert, the expensive wine, the beautiful room. It all seemed grotesque, a mockery of the horror that was unfolding. "I need to go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I walked out of that restaurant, leaving them sitting there with their champagne and their victory. The cool night air hit me, but I couldn't feel it. I felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness where my heart used to be. My daughter, my sweet Callie, hadn't just stolen my money. She had stolen my past, my memories, and my love for her. She had murdered the father I was and left a stranger in his place. And in that moment, the quiet, satisfied life of Walter Peterson came to a shattering end. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. I existed in a fog of disbelief and a pain so profound it was a physical presence, a constant weight on my chest. I kept replaying that dinner in my mind, Callie's cold eyes, Brent's smug smile. I'd call her phone, hoping it was all a terrible misunderstanding. At first she'd answer, her voice impatient. "Dad, you're overreacting. Everything is under control. Brent is a genius. Just trust us." "Trust you?" I'd choke out. "How can I ever trust you again? You forged my signature on a $500,000 loan." "It wasn't a forge. You signed it." "You just didn't read it," she'd snap back. "It's not my fault you're financially illiterate. We're building an empire, and you're complaining about the foundation." After a week of these circular, heart-wrenching conversations, she stopped answering my calls altogether. My texts went unread. I drove to their house once, a gated community with pristine lawns and an air of sterile perfection. The security guard at the gate called up to their house, then looked at me with pity. "I'm sorry, sir. They're not accepting visitors." My own daughter, barring me at the gate. 2 weeks later, the first letter from Scion Capital Holdings arrived. It was a polite, professional welcome, confirming the activation of the personal guarantee associated with the loan to Innovate Dynamics. It was real. The chain was locked, and it was attached to me. I gathered every financial document I owned and made an appointment with my lawyer, a man named George Finney, who had handled my will in Helen's estate. George was a portly man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a methodical mind. He listened patiently as I laid out the whole sordid story, my voice cracking with shame and anger. He spent nearly an hour poring over the loan document I'd brought from the restaurant. He held it up to the light, examined the signature with a magnifying glass, and read every line of the fine print. Finally, he leaned back in his leather chair and sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "Walter, this is bad," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The contract is ironclad. It's a standard, albeit aggressive, personal guarantee clause. And the signature," he looked at me apologetically. "Is it yours?" "Yes, but I didn't know what I was signing. She hid it. She lied to me." "I believe you, Walter. I truly do. But from a legal standpoint, proving fraudulent inducement in a case like this, between a father and daughter, is incredibly difficult. You'd have to prove in court that she intentionally deceived you. It becomes a he said, she said situation, and Brent will testify that they explained it all to you. It would be a messy, public, and expensive fight you would likely lose." "So what do I do?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "For now, we wait and hope they make their payments," he said. "The loan is structured with interest-only payments for the first year, about $30,500 a month. As long as they cover that, Scion Capital won't come knocking on your door." Hope. It was a fragile thing to cling to. For 3 months, a tense quiet settled. I didn't hear from Callie, and I didn't hear from the bank. I tried to find a semblance of my old life. I went to my workshop, but the wood felt alien in my hands. The joy was gone, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. I'd sit in Helen's chair, staring at photos of Callie as a child, on her first bike, at her high school graduation, smiling and innocent. Where did that girl go? Was she ever even real? Then the second letter came. It was not a welcome. It was a notice. Notice of default. Innovate Dynamics had missed their third payment. The letter stated that if the arrears were not settled within 30 days, they would exercise their rights under the guarantee agreement. My hands shook as I called Brent. He answered on the third ring, his voice breezy. "Walter, long time no speak." "Don't you Walter me, you son of a bitch," I growled, all pretense of civility gone. "I got a default notice. You missed a payment." There was a pause. "Ah, yes. A minor cash flow issue. We're restructuring a few things. It's a temporary hiccup. Nothing to worry about." "Nothing to worry about?" "They're going to come after me, my house, my savings." "Relax, old man," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It'll be handled. We have bigger things to worry about than a single late payment." He hung up. He never made another payment. The call started soon after. Polite at first, then firm, then demanding. Men and women with cold, detached voices from the risk management department at Scion Capital. They didn't care about my story of betrayal. They cared about the signature on page 12. George Finney did his best. He negotiated, he filed motions, he tried to buy me time. But Scion Capital was a vulture fund. They'd likely bought the debt from the original lender for pennies on the dollar, and their entire business model was based on ruthlessly collecting. They had no interest in payment plans or sob stories. They wanted their pound of flesh. The downward spiral was terrifyingly fast. To cover the mounting interest and legal fees, I had to start liquidating. The first to go was my classic car, a 1967 Ford Mustang I had lovingly restored with my own hands. Watching it get loaded onto a flatbed truck felt like they were tearing a part of me away. Next went my stock portfolio, the nest egg I had carefully built over 40 years. I sold it all at a loss, a fire sale to satisfy the ravenous maw of the debt. My savings account, my emergency fund, my retirement accounts, drained one by one until they were nothing but dust. Throughout it all, there was only silence from Callie and Brent. It was as if they had ceased to exist. I later learned from a mutual acquaintance that they were on an extended business trip in Europe. They were posting photos from Paris and Rome while my world was being dismantled, piece by painful piece. The final blow came on a gray winter morning, A certified letter arrived. It was from Scion Capital's legal team. They were placing a lien on my last major asset, my house, the forever home I had built for Helen. They were giving me 90 days to settle the remaining balance of $482,000, or they would initiate foreclosure proceedings. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter shaking in my hand, and looked around at the walls that held my entire life. I saw Helen laughing by the stove. I saw a 5-year-old Callie hiding behind a chair during a game of hide and seek. I saw a lifetime of love, of work, of memory, and it was all about to be taken from me because of a signature on a piece of paper I never should have signed. That evening, I sat in my workshop, the smell of cedar and sawdust doing little to comfort me. I was broken. A 72-year-old man who was about to be homeless, my life's work turned to ash. My only child a phantom who had robbed me and vanished. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket. It was over. I had lost. I had nothing left to fight with. I picked up a half-finished wooden blue jay, its glass eyes staring blankly back at me. I ran my thumb over the smooth wood, and as I sat there in the dark, a memory surfaced. A tiny, insignificant detail from years ago, a ghost of a conversation with Helen. And in that moment, a flicker of something that was not despair ignited in the ruins of my heart. It was a tiny, dangerous ember of an idea. The memory that surfaced in the dusty silence of my workshop was as clear as if it had happened yesterday. It was about 15 years ago. A subcontractor on a big commercial project had tried to alter a contract after I'd signed it, changing the material specifications to cheaper alternatives. It ended up in a messy legal dispute. I won, but it taught me a valuable lesson. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table with Helen afterwards, venting my frustration. She was the one with the razor-sharp mind for details. "You need to tell, Walt," she'd said, stirring her tea. "Something that proves a signature is yours and that you meant to sign that specific document. Something small, something only you would know." We'd brainstorm for an hour, laughing like a pair of teenage spies. We settled on something subtle. In my last name, Peterson, I would add a tiny, almost imperceptible second loop at the bottom of the P. It was minuscule, looking like an accidental slip of the pen to the untrained eye. But it was deliberate. From that day forward, on any document of legal or financial significance, contracts, deeds, wills, tax filings, I used the Helen P on everything else. Birthday cards, letters, casual notes, I used my normal signature. It was our secret, a silent testament to a hard-won lesson. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A frantic, desperate hope ignited within me. I scrambled from my workshop back into the house to the file cabinet where I kept my important papers. My hands trembled as I pulled out the deed to the house, my will, my old business incorporation documents. I spread them out on the dining room table under the bright overhead light. There it was, on every single one, the tiny secret loop at the base of the P in Peterson, a ghost in the ink, Helen's ghost, whispering to me across the years. Then, with a feeling of profound dread and electric anticipation, I retrieved the copy of the loan guarantee from the pile of menacing letters sent by Scion Capital. I smoothed it out on the table, my breath held tight in my chest. I stared at the signature, the one that had ruined my life. Walter Peterson. The cursive was a near-perfect mimicry of my own, but as I stared at the capital P, my world tilted on its axis. The second loop was missing. It was my regular, everyday signature, the kind I'd use to sign for a package or on a restaurant credit card slip. It wasn't the signature I would ever use on a $500,000 personal guarantee. They hadn't just tricked me, they had forged it. They must have traced one of my casual signatures from a check or a card I'd left at their house. They were clever, but they weren't perfect. They didn't know my secret. Helen's secret. A wave of adrenaline washed over me, so potent it left me dizzy. This changed everything. This wasn't a case of me being duped into signing something. This was a criminal act. Forgery. Fraud. But George Finney's weary voice echoed in my mind. It becomes a he said, she said situation. A tiny missing loop in a signature wasn't a smoking gun. A prosecutor would call it a handwriting variation. Their defense lawyer would paint me as a forgetful old man trying to renege on a deal. I needed more. I needed irrefutable proof. The despair I had felt just an hour earlier was gone, burned away by a cold, clarifying rage. The grief for my daughter was still there, a hard knot in my gut, but it was now overshadowed by a new, singular purpose. They hadn't just taken my money and my house. They had insulted my intelligence. They had desecrated the memory of my wife by underestimating the protections she had helped me put in place. They thought I was a feeble old man, a walking wallet to be emptied and discarded. They were about to find out how wrong they were. My mind, which had been clouded by sorrow for months, was suddenly sharp. My old contractor brain, the one that could manage a dozen subcontractors and solve complex logistical problems, kicked into gear. This was no longer a legal problem. This was a construction project. The project was the complete and utter demolition of Brent and Calantha's life. And I would be the architect, the foreman, and the wrecking ball. The first step was to find an ally. George Finney was a good man, a man of laws and motions. I needed someone who operated in the grayer areas of life, someone who knew how people like Brent thought and worked. My mind immediately went to Frank Kowalski. Frank was a retired police detective, a friend from my poker games. He was a gruff, cynical man with a bulldog's tenacity and a deep-seated hatred for bullies and con artists. After his wife passed, he'd started a small private investigation business, mostly handling cheating spouses and insurance fraud, but his instincts were as sharp as they'd ever been. I called him the next morning. "Frank, it's Walter Peterson. I need your help. It's about my daughter." I met him at a greasy spoon diner halfway between our houses. Over burnt coffee and stale donuts, I laid out the entire story, from the celebratory dinner to the missing loop in my signature. I expected skepticism. What I got was a slow, grim nod. "I've seen this 100 times, Walt," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Vulture kids. They see their parents not as people, but as uncashed lottery tickets. This Brent character sounds like a classic sociopath, and he's turned your daughter into his accomplice." He looked at the copy of the signature. "This is good, this loop thing. It shows premeditation on your part to protect yourself. It establishes a pattern, but on its own, it's not enough to put them in a cage. We need to catch them in the act. We need to make them confess." "How?" I asked, leaning forward. "They won't even speak to me." Frank took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, they'll speak to you, Walter. We just have to build the right stage for their performance. People like this, their greatest weakness is their ego. They think they've won. They think you're beaten. We're going to use that. We're going to give them a reason to come back and take one last bite of the apple. And when they do," he said, a grim smile touching his lips, "we'll make sure the apple is wired for sound." Leaving that diner, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. The chain was still around my neck, but for the first time I could feel a weak link, and I had a plan to break it. Frank Kowalski was a master strategist. He approached the problem not like a cop, but like a hunter. "We can't go after them with what we have," he explained in our first real strategy session in his cluttered office. "We have to make them come to us. We need to create a situation where their greed overpowers their caution." Our first step was research. Frank, with his PI license and old police contacts, started digging into Brent's past and the corporate filings for Innovate Dynamics. What he found was both shocking and sickeningly predictable. Innovate Dynamics was a shell. It had no employees, no clients, no products. It was a legal entity created for the sole purpose of securing the loan. The address was a P.O. box. The massive international contract Brent had boasted about was a complete fabrication. Frank tracked the money from the loan. It hadn't gone into business development. It had been funneled through a series of offshore accounts and then used to fund their lavish lifestyle. The cars, the jewelry, the European business trip. They were systematically burning through my life savings. Even more damning, Brent had a history. He'd left a trail of failed startups and angry investors in 2 other states. He was a professional parasite, skilled at finding wealthy, vulnerable targets and bleeding them dry. This time his target had been me, and his way in had been my own daughter. "He's a predator, Walter," Frank said, tossing a folder of documents onto his desk. "And Callie. She's either the most brainwashed person on the planet or she's a willing partner in crime. At this point, it doesn't matter. They're a unit. With this information, we began to build our trap. The bait had to be irresistible. It had to be the one thing they hadn't managed to get their hands on yet. My house. The foreclosure proceedings had begun, but the process was slow. We had a little time. Here's the play, Frank laid out. You're going to contact them, not with anger, but with total, complete surrender. Surrender? I balked. The thought was repulsive. Complete, utter defeat, Frank stressed. You're a broken man, Walt. They've won. You've lost everything. The bank is taking the house. But you have one final offer for them, a way to help them. The plan was as simple as it was devious. I would reach out to Callie and tell her I was about to be evicted. I would tell her that I had found a way to stop the foreclosure, but I couldn't do it alone. I would use a legal maneuver, a quitclaim deed, to sign the house over to her and Brent immediately. My reasoning would be that with the house in their name, they could use it as leverage to secure a new loan, pay off Scion Capital, and keep the property. I would tell them it was my last gift to her, my way of ensuring she would always have the family home, even if I couldn't live in it anymore. It's a perfect appeal to their narcissism, Frank explained. First, it confirms their victory. You're admitting they were smarter than you. Second, it offers them the grand prize, free and clear, without a messy foreclosure auction. They'll see it as tying up a loose end and getting the one asset they haven't been able to touch. The greed will be too much to resist. The signing would not happen at a real lawyer's office. Frank had a friend, another retired cop, who owned a small office building that was mostly empty on the weekends. We would stage one of the offices to look like a legitimate legal practice, and it would be rigged from top to bottom with hidden cameras and microphones. The hardest part of the plan for me was making that call. It took me 3 days to work up the courage. I had to swallow every ounce of my pride and rage. I had to become the pathetic old man they believed me to be. I finally called Callie's number. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice wary. "What do you want?" I took a deep breath and let my voice tremble. I channeled all the pain and exhaustion of the past few months. "Callie, sweetheart, I'm not calling to fight." There was a suspicious silence on the other end. "I got the final notice from the bank," I said, my voice cracking. "They're taking the house. I'll be out by the end of the month." I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "Oh, Dad, I'm sorry to hear that." The sympathy in her voice was thin, transparently false. "It's okay," I sighed heavily. "You and Brent were right. It was a good investment. I was just too old to see it. I'm sorry I doubted you." This part almost choked me, but I forced the words out. "Listen, the reason I'm calling, I don't want to see Helen's house sold off to strangers at an auction. It should be yours. It was always meant to be yours." I explained the quitclaim deed proposal. I told her I'd had my lawyer draw up the papers. All they had to do was come and sign them. It would be their house. My final gift. "You'd do that?" she asked, a note of genuine surprise and a flicker of avarice in her tone. "You'd just give it to us? You're my daughter, Callie. It's all I have left to give." She told me she needed to talk to Brent and would call me back. I knew she would. The bait was in the water. An hour later, she called. Brent wanted to speak to me directly. His voice was no longer condescending, but cautious, like a wolf sniffing at a trap. He asked a dozen questions about the legalities, about the bank, about the timeline. I answered each one with the script Frank and I had rehearsed, playing the part of a befuddled old man who just wanted to do right by his daughter. "All right, Walter," he said finally, the hook setting deep. "We'll do it, for Callie's sake, to preserve her mother's legacy. Send us the address of the lawyer's office. We'll be there Saturday at 10 a.m. When I hung up the phone, my hands were slick with sweat. I felt dirty, having debased myself like that. But a cold fire was burning in my chest. The trap was set. The prey was on its way. All that was left was to spring it. Frank was ecstatic. "They took it. Hook, line, and sinker. Walter, you're a hell of an actor." The next few days were a flurry of activity. Frank and his tech guys set up the office. Tiny cameras were hidden in smoke detectors, pens on the desk, even in the frame of a bland motivational poster on the wall. Microphones were placed to pick up every whisper. Frank briefed two of his most trusted detective friends from the force who would be waiting in the adjacent office, listening to the live feed. This had to be done by the book. A private recording might be inadmissible, but if they listened live and heard the confession of a crime, they would have probable cause to enter and make an arrest. On Friday night, Frank and I sat in the staged office, doing one last check. The room felt cold and sterile. The quitclaim deed, a completely fake document drafted by Frank, sat in the center of the polished mahogany desk. "You ready for this, Walt?" Frank asked, his expression serious. I looked around the room, a stage set for the final act of a tragedy. "I'm not ready to see my daughter's face when it happens, Frank, but I'm ready for justice." He nodded. "Justice is what you're going to get." I went home that night and didn't sleep. I sat in Helen's armchair, thinking of the bright, smiling girl I had raised. I mourned her for the last time, because the woman who was coming tomorrow, the stranger who wore my daughter's face, deserved no grief. She deserved only the cold, hard consequences of her own actions. Saturday morning dawned gray and overcast, a perfect pathetic fallacy for the day's events. I dressed not in a suit, but in an old frayed cardigan and worn trousers. I didn't shave. I wanted to look every bit the defeated man I was pretending to be. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the tired, gray-faced stranger staring back. Frank picked me up at 9. We drove to the office building in silence. The detectives, a man named Peterson, no relation, a bitter irony, and a woman named Diaz were already there, set up in the monitoring room next door. They were all business, their faces grim. They nodded at me with a mixture of professionalism and pity. "Mr. Peterson," Detective Diaz said, "just to be clear, we are here as observers. We will not act unless we have clear probable cause that a crime has been or is being committed. We need to hear them admit to the forgery or the fraudulent scheme. Can you get them there?" "I think so," I said, my voice steady. "Their arrogance is my secret weapon." Frank and I went into the staged office. He would play the part of my paralegal, there to witness the signing. The room was chilly. The hidden cameras stared down like unblinking eyes. I sat behind the large desk, the fake deed in front of me, and waited. The final minutes ticked by with the slowness of a funeral procession. At precisely 10 a.m., the door opened. Callie and Brent entered. They looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. She was in a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit. He in a cashmere sweater over a crisp-collared shirt. They looked powerful, successful, and utterly without remorse. "Dad," Callie said, her tone a careful blend of feigned sympathy and impatience. "Let's get this over with." Brent strode over to the desk and picked up the fake deed, scanning it with a practiced eye. A quitclaim, smart, clean, wipes the slate. He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "You know, Walter, for a guy who knows how to build a house, you really don't know much about protecting one. You should have had better legal counsel." The arrogance. It was even more breathtaking in person. "I trusted my family," I said quietly, letting my gaze fall to the desk. "That was your first mistake," Brent said with a soft chuckle. He passed the document to Callie. I let them review the papers for a moment, then I held up my hand. "Before we sign," I said, my voice soft and weary, "I just have to ask, for my own peace of mind." They both looked at me, annoyed by the delay. "Why?" I asked, looking directly at Callie. "Was it just the money? Was everything, my entire life's work, just a number on a spreadsheet to you?" Callie flinched, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her. She avoided my eyes. It was Brent who answered, stepping forward as if to shield her. "Don't get all sentimental, Walter. This is the real world. It's about seizing opportunities. You had dormant assets. We activated them. It's simple economics." "Dormant assets?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "That was my future, your mother's legacy. Helen would have wanted to help her daughter," Callie mumbled, staring at a spot on the carpet. That was the line, the one I couldn't let pass. I felt the cold rage solidify in my veins. "Don't you dare bring her name into this," I said, my voice low and dangerous. I stood up slowly, leaning my knuckles on the desk. The feeble old man act was over. Your mother would have been ashamed of you. She would have seen him, I said, pointing a trembling finger at Brent, for the cheap con artist he is. And she would have been heartbroken by what he's turned you into. Now listen here, Brent started, stepping towards me. No, you listen, I boomed, my voice echoing in the small office. I know everything. Innovate Dynamics is a shell company. The international contract is a fantasy. And that loan? You've spent it on watches and vacations while I was forced to sell off every single thing I've ever owned. They were stunned into silence, their confident facades crumbling. How did you know that? Callie whispered, her face pale. It doesn't matter, I said, pressing my advantage. What matters is the signature on that loan, the one you were so clever about. I looked directly at Brent. You're a good forger, I'll give you that. You must have traced it from a check or something I signed at your house. It was almost perfect. Brent scoffed, regaining some of his bravado. You're delusional. You signed it. We watched you. Oh, I signed the trust papers, I said, a grim smile forming on my face. But not the guarantee, and you made one small mistake, a mistake you couldn't possibly have known about. I walked over to a whiteboard Frank had placed in the corner of the room. I picked up a marker. My signature, I said, and wrote my name in large, clear letters, Walter Peterson. Then I did it again, right below the first. To anyone else, they would look identical. Do you see a difference? I asked them. They stared, confused. No, Brent said dismissively. Look closer, I said, my voice like ice. I pointed to the capital P in the second signature. Look at the loop, the bottom of the P. I drew a circle around the tiny second loop I had made. Helen's loop. On every legal or financial document I have signed for the last 15 years, I have used this signature. It's a security measure, my own private watermark. I turned to face them, letting the marker clatter to the floor. The signature on that $500,000 loan guarantee? It doesn't have that mark. You forged the wrong one. The color drained from Brent's face. Callie looked like she was going to be sick. The trap was sprung. It was a good plan, Brent stammered, his mind racing. It was flawless. Flawless, I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You got greedy, and you underestimated me. You thought I was just some old fool you could discard. Then Brent did exactly what Frank predicted he would. His ego took over. He couldn't stand being outsmarted. It would have worked, he snarled, his face contorted in a mask of rage. The signature was perfect. I spent a week practicing it. That stupid little loop, that's just a trick. It doesn't prove anything. We had you. We had everything. You admit it then? A new voice said from the doorway. We all turned. Detective Diaz and Detective Peterson were standing there, their faces like stone. Diaz was holding a small digital recorder. You admit to practicing his signature for the purpose of forgery? Brent froze, his eyes wide with panic. He looked from the detectives to me, to the cameras he was only now noticing in the corners of the room. He saw the whiteboard, the two signatures, the fake deed on the table. He saw the perfectly constructed cage that had closed around him. Callie let out a small, strangled sob and sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Brent, the slick operator, the master of the universe, looked like a cornered rat. You set us up. No, I said, walking slowly back to the desk. You set yourselves up. I just held the door open for you. Detective Peterson stepped forward. Brent Miller, Calantha Peterson Miller, you are under arrest for conspiracy, grand theft, and forgery. As the detective read them their rights and cuffed their hands behind their backs, Callie finally looked at me. Her face was a wreck of tears and disbelief. Dad? She whimpered, as if seeing me for the first time. How could you? I looked into the eyes of my daughter, the child I had loved more than life itself, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. You should have asked yourself that question, I said quietly, before you handed me that envelope. They were led out of the room. The clicking of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The aftermath was swift. With Brent's taped confession and Frank's evidence, the district attorney's case was airtight. Scion Capital immediately dropped their foreclosure action, and the lien on my house vanished. The story made the local news, a brief, sensationalist piece about a family torn apart by greed. Brent, ever the survivor, turned on Callie to get a plea bargain, earning him a sentence of 7 to 10 years in prison. For Callie, my lawyer negotiated a different path. She avoided jail time, receiving 5 years probation and community service. The court seized their assets, the car, the jewelry, the designer clothes, but the auction barely made a dent in what they had stolen. I knew I'd never recover the money, but my victory was never about the finances. It was about principle. Life began its slow return to a new kind of normal. My friends from the poker game rallied around me, their quiet company a welcome anchor. I returned to my workshop, the familiar scent of cedar and sawdust a comfort, but the victory felt hollow. I had my house back, but I had lost my only child. I was overcome not by rage, but by a profound and unshakable grief for the daughter I thought I knew. Months later, while cleaning out an old closet, I found a small, locked wooden box that had belonged to Helen. I hadn't had the heart to open it since her passing. Finding the key in her old jewelry case, I turned the lock. Inside, among old photos and a lock of Callie's baby hair, was a thick envelope with my name written in Helen's familiar, elegant script. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a letter, penned in the final months of her life. My dearest Walter, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I pray you have known many happy years without me. I am writing because of a mother's fear I cannot shake. It is about our Callie. I love her dearly, but I see a hunger in her for status, for things. And that young man, Brent, he feeds that hunger. I worry that he does not see you as a father, but as a bank. Your love for her has made you generous, my dear husband. I fear that one day they will see that generosity not as a gift, but as an opportunity. I cannot protect you from the future, but I can offer one last safety net. Years ago, I took a small portion of the money from your father's farmland sale, $50,000, and invested it in an account under my name only. I have never touched it. The account details are on the enclosed statement. Think of it as my final gift to you. Use it for a rainy day or, God forbid, use it to rebuild if they ever break your heart. You gave me a perfect life, Walter Peterson. Don't let anyone take the joy of it from you. All my love forever. Helen. Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. Tucked behind the letter was a recent bank statement for a brokerage account I never knew existed. Over decades of patient growth, Helen's secret fund had flourished. The final balance was over $600,000, more than they had taken from me. I sat there in the quiet dustiness of the closet, clutching the letter. My daughter had handed me an envelope containing my ruin, a surprise born of greed. But my Helen, my brilliant, loving wife, had left me an envelope with my salvation. Hers was the true inheritance, a final fierce act of love that reached across time to save me. The money didn't erase the pain of my daughter's betrayal, but it was a powerful reminder that while one love had failed me, another had been true enough to last beyond the grave. In the end, that was the only asset that ever truly mattered. And that's my story. It's a hard one to tell, and I thank you for listening. The scars are still there, a constant reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we love the most. But Helen's final gift wasn't just the money, it was a lesson. It taught me that while some people will try to tear you down, true strength is found in standing back up, in fighting for what's right, and in honoring the memory of those who truly loved you. My daughter chose a path of greed, and now she walks it alone, dealing with the harsh karma of her choices. My path now is one of peace, of quiet days in my workshop, and of gratitude for a love that was strong enough to protect me even after it was gone. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced a betrayal that tested your soul, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories about life, loss, and the long, hard road to justice. Most importantly, leave a comment below. Have you ever been blindsided by someone you trusted? How did you find the strength to fight back? Your stories matter. Let's connect. Thank you for being here.